All right. Welcome to this morning's webinar presented by ITI. It's with great pleasure that we're hosting this webinar this morning to go over some of our virtualization alternatives. As you probably have heard, there's been some disturbance in the market since the acquisition of VMware by Brocade, and we're going to go through some of the alternatives available for you. Before we get into the presentation, please note that we are monitoring the chat. So if you have questions, we encourage you to use the chat to ask your questions. There's also going to be a period of questions at the end where our experts will be responding, answering the questions that you might have. So please, this event is for you. So don't shy away from asking any questions if you have any. Okay, let's get going. So my name is Martin Demarinis. I currently lead the Data Center and Infrastructure Business Unit at ITI Canada. I'll be your host today, and we'll let the real experts present you with the content of the presentation. We have Gabriel Gosselin, Director of Professional Services at ITI, based out of Laval, and Adam McQuaig, Solution Architect for Data Center and Infrastructure, based out of Toronto, actually in the GTA area. So let's get going. Before we get into the details of our alternatives, I wanted to make sure that we gave you a quick glimpse of who ITI is. We currently service north of 1,700 clients across Canada with 500 plus employees, including our staffing resources, and we have 5 offices across Canada. We are a Canadian organization servicing Canada today. And we're very happy to work with you in regards to multiple solutions pertaining to data center and infrastructure, cloud transformation, end user computing, data and AI, as well as modern workplace. Okay, enough with the marketing slides. Let's get into what's happened and what's currently happening with VMware. So last summer, there was a big wave of change that hit all of us in the industry. VMware got acquired by Brocade, and major changes occurred in the ecosystem pertaining to VMware licenses. So I will be highlighting some of the changes that happened and what that means for you. Once we've gone through this, we're going to talk about one of our alternative, which is Azure Local, formerly known as Azure HCI with Gabriel. And then we will go through another alternative, which is Nutanix AHV with Adam McQuaig to finish the webinar. So 4 major changes occurred with VMware. First, you can only from now on, acquire licenses through subscription models. So no more options for you outside of subscription, which means that there's going to be renewal periods coming forward. And if you look at one of the limited options that we now see, 3 to 5 years contracts only. You can renew for less than 3 or 5 years, but the initial contract needs to be 3 to 5 years. The licenses are also licensed by 16 core increments, which has a significant impact on your architecture. If you have 20 cores, for instance, you'd need to procure before last week 32 licenses. The last week, another change occurred around the VMware licensing, and they now require that you consume a minimum of 72 cores. So no matter how many licenses you have below 72, you will need to buy 72 core licenses to get going. There's also a very high propensity to sell VCF. So when you speak to your partners, your colleagues, or with VMware, you'll notice that VCF gets highly discounted in comparison to other options within the VMware ecosystem. So there's a push towards the VCF Virtual Cloud Foundation product from VMware. And you'll also notice that you can no longer buy VMware the same way you used to buy it before. Before the changes, it was possible for you to buy licenses through your OEM vendor or hardware manufacturer preferred partner. So if you consume Dell servers, for instance, or HPE or Cisco, you could actually procure the servers and the licenses through one contract and one purchase order and get access to your technology as well as the software that you need to run your business. But that has all changed. The major manufacturers lost their ability to distribute VMware licenses. There are some exceptions. For instance, Dell will sell VMware through their VxRail solution. But essentially, you now need to work with a value-added reseller through distribution to procure VMware licenses. What does this mean for all of us? Well, first of all, we've seen 3 to 4x, and that's very conservative, 3 to 4x price increase. In reality, we've seen customers get hit hard by 10x increases on their cost. The addition of the minimum core requirements on top of forcing some of the top bracket customers to buy only VCF has made it very difficult to respect budgets that were allocated for this specific part of your business. VMware has actually segmented their customer base into different buckets. Large users such as governments, municipalities, tier one enterprise organizations have been categorized as strategic customers for VMware. And the only product that will be available for them to procure is VCF, Virtual Cloud Foundation. So imagine for an instant that you are a strategic customer for VMware, and with that comes a lot of love, and, and you are currently running vSphere. Well, all of a sudden, what needs to happen is you can no longer buy just vSphere. You need to buy VCF, and you need to buy it in increments of 16 licenses. So that combined to the cost increase, pure pricing increase from VMware has made it very difficult for clients to keep going with status quo. Most users, what we're seeing in the market is that most users are planning an exit. And there are multiple ways to de-risk your business from that price increase. And it essentially revolves around a combination of cloud offerings and on-prem alternatives, and we're going to go through these alternatives. Now, you may need to renew at least once to allow you to plan your exit or plan a partial exit towards an alternative. So we've seen that as well. Most of our clients had to renew a year so they can look at how they would move some of their business outside of the VMware ecosystem. Another consideration is the fourth one. A mixed virtualized environment is okay. Most organizations today have a minimum of 2 vendors per product line, right? Dual vendor strategy to make sure everybody remains honest and competition is always healthy when it comes to technology. So you probably have a couple of vendors or more for your compute products, same for storage, networking, and so on and so forth. However, the industry has evolved around having only one virtualization partner, which was VMware. It's okay to consider a dual strategy in this space as well. There are ways to identify workloads that could easily be migrated away from VMware onto another platform, and that's what we'll be talking about today. So let's not shy away from evaluating that option as well, to have to run 2 different solutions in your environment to de-risk your business, lower your cost, and the price tag associated with virtualization. There are 3 main alternatives, on-prem alternatives, that is. Azure Local, formerly known as Azure Stack HCI, is a hyper-converged solution based out of Microsoft's technology that allows you to run your environment on standard x86 compute, software-defined networking, software-defined storage, Hyper-V as an hypervisor, and integrated in the Azure cloud. So that we will go through later this morning, but it is a great landing zone or great use case if you are currently leveraging the Azure cloud, because it allows you to maintain a single tool, whether your workload is staged in the cloud or actually ran on-prem, which is a beautiful thing to consider. The second alternative is any Linux-based hypervisor. Sometimes hyperconvergence is not a technology that will fit your requirements. So Linux offers a breadth of options depending on who licenses it. ITI will always recommend you to go through a supported solution. And there are many. Red Hat Linux is an example. Ubuntu is another one. There's a bunch of options out there that allow you to consume open source code, but supported, right? If anything goes sideways, always good to have a support contract in place. These solutions can run on hyper-converged technologies, but it can also run on three-tier architectures. So servers, storage, block storage, SAN, NAS, and the networking in between. So that also is an option. And the third option is AHV from Nutanix, another hyper-converged solution, but very different in essence. Multi-cloud integration and a lot of add-on services as well to the platform, which we'll go through a little later this morning. This is a heavy slide. I'm not going to read it all for you, but the presentation will be made available for you later, and you can use it as a guide when looking into these different options. We've compared the different solutions with key metrics, and it gives a pretty good overview of what you could be considering. Before I pass it on to Gabriel, I just wanted to give you a quick update, and that's coming from Gartner. So right now, most clients, as I said earlier, are looking for alternatives. Some customers, we will defer the change or the adoption of a new technology. Some will swap technology. Some will completely step away from the technology and implement new architectures from the get-go, and others will look at modernizing their application stack to start leveraging containers. From a swap perspective, numbers show that 20% of organizations will stick with VMware for multiple reasons. Some applications only support VMware as a virtualization engine. Some applications were developed and optimized to run on VMware, and some organizations don't have the staff on hand to learn, implement new tools. So 20% of workloads will remain on VMware. 30% of workloads will change hypervisors, right? It could be Linux-based, it could be Hyper-V, it could be Nutanix AHV. There's multiple options out there, and 30% of organizations or workloads will be migrated to a new hypervisor, and 5% of clients will move to a distributed HCI, which includes hypervisors. So it's a little confusing, but a distributed HCI is a solution such as AHV from Nutanix or Azure Local. There are additional services around such a platform, orchestration, management of the infrastructure, and hypervisor. So by moving to a hyperconverged or distributed HCI, you also perform a virtualization engine change in your environment. And finally, rich HCI, which is essentially hybrid cloud solutions. 10% of workloads will move to VMware offerings in the cloud. So we see this right now as an option for clients. I just wanted to show some color around that option. Most cloud providers have not yet required to renew their VMware contract. So before subscribing to a VMware in the cloud solution, I would recommend you inquire with your potential hyperscaler if there are any pricing guarantees moving forward, if this is reflective of the new VMware pricing, because if it's not, then you could be stuck with the same problem a year down the road, where when the hypervisor organization negotiates pricing with VMware, if there's a cost increase there, then your cloud services are going to go through the roof as well from a cost perspective. So just be sensitive sensitive to that and ask questions as you make your researches and start planning your strategy. The lift and shift. We've seen a few at ITI. We've performed a complete overhaul from a hypervisor perspective is not the norm. It's roughly 10% of organizations that will go through an exercise of completely removing VMware from their environment and changing to something different. But keep in mind that it's far from being impossible. We have performed a few of these migrations ourselves, and customers are running on new tools today, which is exciting to them because it's freed up some budgets and it's doable, but it's not the norm. But the main message on that slide is the last one, the modernization aspect of your transformation. The mitigation of that risk, swapping a hypervisor for another, is a good way to free up some budget and de-risk your business in the short and mid-term. From now to the next 5 years, it's a good way for you to prepare what's next. And what's next is modernization. The adoption of containers needs to be the end game. It needs to be the end game for multiple reasons. First, it will allow your organization to decouple itself from potential vendor lock-in, right? You never know what's going to happen in the future. We've just gone through this with VMware. It could come from anybody else moving forward. So in the long run, you want to make sure you keep control and your agility to move your workloads where you think they would be better suited to be ran. So transforming your applications on-prem, adopting containers needs to be the long game. And in the long run, you will benefit from that transformation modernization. And I strongly encourage you to keep this as part of your transformation plan. If only to decouple yourself from potential vendor lock-ins. The second reason why this is important is that all new grads today in our industry are currently being taught to drive containers. This is what they learn. And we will get into a space where all of the available expertise will be comfortable with containers and not as comfortable with other technologies. And the swing will happen very quickly. Once this happens, there'll be no turning back. Let's not get surprised by this. Let's make sure that we plan ahead and start looking into modernization activities. ITI can definitely help you there. And if you have any questions pertaining to that, please inquire to myself or to my colleagues. We can definitely help you out with this. Okay, I just want to make sure that we're good with the chat. Perfect. Okay, now enough with the sales guy. Let's go with the experts. Gabriel Gosselin, I'll let you introduce yourself, Gabriel. I'll shut down my camera so people don't get distracted by myself. And go ahead, my friend.
Thanks, Martin. So like Martin said, I'm Gabriel Gosselin. I'm in charge of consulting at ITI. I come from a technical background, so I've been working mostly in VMware and in Azure over the last 15 years, and I oversee the delivery of those transitions to our clients. So I thought it could be interesting for you guys to kind of, like Martin says, sometimes the sales guy says one thing, sometimes the delivery guy says a different thing. So I just want to come to you guys with one of the alternatives that we're looking at, which is Azure Local. Martin, if you can switch to the next slide, please. Thank you. I want to start by just obviously acknowledging the fact that Azure Local used to be called Azure Stack HCI. This is not a new product. This is a new name for this product. This is a new focus for this product. And through a lot of conversations I've had with clients over the last few weeks around Azure Local, I've had more than a few clients inquire about the fact that, hey, this is newer software. Is this going to be stable enough for my environment? Now, the base of Azure Stack HCI and Azure Local is Hyper-V and storage spaces in Windows Server. So we're not starting from a base that is completely new and unproven and untested. We're starting from a space that has existed in some fashion or another in Windows Server since 2008. So the foundation we're on is pre-existing. Now, the second part I find interesting about Azure Local is the bridge it creates between traditional hypervisor and the cloud. Traditionally, when we used to talk about hybrid cloud, hybrid cloud for most people would be creating a network link between on-prem and Azure or on-prem and AWS. So basically, hybrid was just the fact that we could communicate with the cloud. Now, what Azure Local brings to the table is the idea of taking some of the platform as a service solutions where the true value of the cloud resides and making them available on both sides. So instead of saying hybrid is just the ability to connect to the cloud, here hybrid is the ability to consume and use PaaS services locally. So some of the key elements we're going to see are the availability of Azure App Service for web application hosting, the availability of Azure Kubernetes Service to host containers, just like Martin was talking about, the availability of Azure Automation, Azure Virtual Desktop, plenty of features that used to be only available in the cloud can now be consumed on-prem. Now, the reason why we think Azure Local is relevant to a lot of our clients is the fact that if you have some Azure consumption, the same skill set you've built in Azure is used to pilot Azure Local. We use the same portal, we use the same monitoring tools, we use the same way of doing things. So the way we see it is if you're changing from VMware to another solution, you have a massive skill gap. Your team is going to have to be trained on whatever new technology you're going to choose. And the proposal that Azure Local brings is the idea that if your team has experience with VMware and has experience with Azure, then making that switch from VMware to Azure Local isn't such a big scale gap. So we think like it's a way for you guys to adopt something a bit easier and at the same time providing consistent experience between the environments you have in the cloud and the environments you have at the edge. So making things easier to see as a big picture. Martin, if you can switch to the next slide, please. So obviously the statement we've heard for a while was that the world is going to be hybrid. There's going to be very few 100% cloud deployment and very few 100% on-prem deployments. The reasons why is for risk mitigation, for efficiency, for agility. We will want the ability to drive systems and solutions where they matter the most. If we have heavy set of data on-prem, we probably want to co-locate some of our applications and features on-prem. If we have that data in the cloud, we want to do the same thing. By being able to consume these PaaS services, we now have the capability of making that choice wherever the data resides. So it allows us to make kind of better informed decisions about where we should run our infrastructure. Can you go to the next slide, please? So I alluded a bit in the past. What are the key functionality of Azure Local? Again, I want to emphasize in the fact that, and that's true for hybrid cloud and for cloud in general, the true value of a cloud is in its PaaS offering. If it's just hosting VMs, it's not getting us anywhere further. Like Martin was saying, there's a big chunk of systems that are going to go in containers. There's other chunks that are going to go in other PaaS services. So we think this is where the value resides. For Azure Local, one of the core value driver is going to be VDI and remote desktop. Up until now, hosting Windows 11 multi-session, the one where we don't need remote desktop CALs and third-party software and Windows Server OS, used to be only available in Azure. Now we get to have that on-prem as well with the Azure local. We get to bring also lower latency and GPU support straight on these equipments. All of this licensed through Office 365. The second piece I want to highlight in this slide is going to be Azure Kubernetes Service. Installing and maintaining Kubernetes is a hard task. And you used to follow the course on Kubernetes, and there used to be a 700-page book on how to install Kubernetes. And the problem you have is not only finding people that can install Kubernetes, but also manage them and keep them. Retaining that talent is very, very hard. AKS in Azure brought a simplified model where we can simply ask Microsoft to automate that piece, and we get to just deploy our software with very little of the administrative tasks that are normally related to Kubernetes. Again, one of the things we're bringing back from the Azure cloud at the edge is the availability of that service straight in Azure local. So those two services, there's a bunch of other services around this, and Microsoft is adding new services every day. But those services, I think, are what's going to drive core value to using this platform. You can go to the next slide, please. So I just want to kind of highlight back a few of the benefits. So obviously the unified management. Think of it, yes, in terms of change management, a skill gap we have to address. But this also has an impact on security. We now get to see everything from one point of view. We're not scattered all over the place. So the time that we have, we get to spend in looking at the right things. And it allows us to also use some of the policies and the automation we get in Azure and in Terraform, using, again, the same skill set we've built in Azure. So to me, this is one single tool to really deliver through hybrid cloud experience. In terms of agility, like I was saying previously, we get to make the right choice. If we need some of that infrastructure on-prem, we can. If we need it in the cloud, we can. And we can leverage past services on both sides where it matters. Now, the final point on this is sometimes the question is, okay, what's going to be the cost of this? And this is where it gets interesting. If you have Windows Server Data Center with software assurance, which I know a lot of you guys have, Azure Local is free, including the use of AKS. Another interesting fact we found is that this is a hyper-converged solution. Most hyper-converged solution in terms of hardware use the same kind of hardware. So in front of you is an option where you can say, you know what? I get to use Azure Local for free to leverage a new version of hybrid cloud. And I get to do it with very little risk. Because worst case scenario, let's say I'm not happy with Azure Local, the same hyper-converged infrastructure I bought can then be used with other solutions. So basically the choice in front of you is, why not try it? If it works, you get to lower your budget and bring a better hybrid cloud experience. If you're not happy with it, you budgeted for another solution anyways. So you get to make that choice. And I think that's really interesting. If you can go to the next slide, please. On a final point, we have live experience that are going to be available in our Ottawa office shortly, as well as in our Montreal and Quebec City offices. One of the best ways to get familiar with the solution, see it in action, see the hardware, understand how it can help you guys, and have a full discussion around those solutions. We have the Innovation Center that is available to you guys. You can go through your rep or through Martin to book these things, and we can do half-day sessions with you again on that hardware, on that experience, and understanding where that fits in your model. So that's it for me. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you, Gabriel. And just another point, just to conclude with Gabriel's presentation, we have also been running proof of concepts with clients. Gabriel has been spearheading these efforts with customers, leveraging the free licenses that you might have. And Microsoft supports in excess of 150 different x86 products out there. So name a server, it's going to be supported by Microsoft. So we can help you run a proof of concept on the solution, either leveraging our own infrastructure if you don't have any swing gear to do this, or leveraging your own infrastructure. So inquire within. You can reach out to myself, to your account manager, or to Gabrielle. Our contact information is currently on the screen. All right, thank you, my friend. Mr. McQuaig, ready to go?
Absolutely.
Let's rock and roll.
Perfect. So my name's Adam McQuaig. I'm a pre-sales solutions architect here at ITI within the data center infrastructure team. I've been a pre-sales solutions architect for about 8 years now. I hold a VMware Advanced Professional Certification for data center virtualization design, as well as a double VCP in data center virtualization and network virtualization from VMware, and a Nutanix certified systems engineering. I love to chat with customers and clients and organizations about the best solution to fit their needs. And today I'll be talking to you guys a little bit about looking at AHV or Nutanix AHV as an alternative to your existing VMware environment. Next slide, please. Before I get into that, what I want to talk to you guys a little bit about is, let's just admit that infrastructure can be very complex. I mean, our jobs can be, there's a lot of issues that many of the admins and specialists may face. But at the end of the day, what matters most to the organization, to the stakeholders, to our clients is the applications that are adding that value. Would you mind hitting next? Those applications run on, maybe for many of you guys, VMware or that virtualization layer. And what that layer's job or objective is essentially to abstract the resources from your physical servers and provide those applications with the CPU and memory they need to run efficiently. You might hit next. So we have our physical server layer there that runs that virtualization tiers, providing that compute and memory to those applications. And those physical servers will be connected to a network fabric, potentially a fiber channel environment. And then that fiber channel environment is connected to a storage system or a storage area network. With this, you could see right away that it's no joke that this can be very complex, especially with a 3-tier traditional environment. You need a lot of specialized skills, careful integration with completely different vendors. So maybe you're using, as an example, Lenovo physical servers and a completely different brand of SAN. There's a lot of planning that goes involved with this, right? When we think about our apps, it's difficult to have that crystal ball at the end of the day to say, where are we going to go in the next 5 years? How are we going to support these applications moving forward? How can we anticipate new business demands and business mandates? And with that, there's a lot of planning cycles and call it expertise involved with that. And so what I like to ask a lot of people that I talk to at the end of the day is, where do you guys spend most of your time? Are you spending your time tackling those, call it innovating and adding value to the business, tackling those new business mandates that are coming down the pipe? Or are you spending your time sort of treading water and keeping this infrastructure maintained and up and running? Next, please. What I find is when I ask people this, many people state, and you could think about this for your own use case, 80% of their time is really spent treading water, maintaining that equipment, going through many different management interfaces, whether that be the virtualization tier, the servers, the SAN, in order to support those applications that really are what is driving value to the organization. Next slide, please. So what I like to do is I like to give a little bit of an analogy. So what is a hyper-converged infrastructure? What is Nutanix? And how does that compare to maybe what we're running today? And so the analogy I like to use is it's very much like the smartphone, but for the data center. So if we think back, maybe the early 2000s, maybe even before that, many of us probably had a Gordon Gekko cell phone, a notepad, calculator, maybe an MP3 player, an iPod in our pocket. Until one day, some very smart engineers at Apple came out with something called the iPhone. Next, please. So what that iPhone did essentially is it used software to consolidate these siloed technologies into one device. So I don't know about you guys, but I haven't had to use a physical calculator in years now. I just use my phone and open up the calculator app. So it's simplified our lives in a tremendous way, giving us all of these features and functionalities from one single place. And the same can be said today with the data center. So today we'll have our storage area networks or our SANs. We have our physical servers providing compute and memory, maybe a network attached storage device or a file system that's providing file shares, and as well as your top of rack switches connecting everything together. Next, please. What HCI is it's essentially a cluster of 3 or more servers that consolidates your storage, your physical servers, your compute and memory, as well as your file share services into one, call it platform. And that platform's tied together with those top of rack switches. Nutanix is the vendor that essentially pioneered this type of infrastructure well over a decade now. And it's gotten a lot of traction since and made many different feature improvements over the years. Next, please. So when we think about that traditional infrastructure and compare that to HCI, you could see in the left-hand side that there's a lot of different silos. There's a lot of moving parts. There's a lot of management interfaces that a team of IT professionals are going to have to navigate through in order to, again, manage and provide those applications what they need to run effectively. With Nutanix, we're consolidating many of those interfaces, many of those features into a single platform. It's an integrated scale out cluster of 3 or more servers. And it's very simple and easy to manage, giving you one pane of glass, one place for your administration team to go ahead and manage. One aspect that's really amazing about HCI in general is it's highly available and resilient. So when we think about those applications there on the screen, on the right-hand side with that cluster of servers, if an application writes a piece of data, it would write it on more than one node. So as an example, maybe app 1 would write a piece of data or a copy of that data on node 1 and maybe node 3. If, God forbid, something were to happen to any of the servers within that cluster, maybe a server went completely offline, maybe some components within that server were to fail, that application has a secondary source where it can read that information. It can essentially live on a different node. So if there was we'll call it a hardware failure within an environment, the users might not even notice that there's an issue that the IT team's tackling. So that environment can keep up and running and give IT administrators the peace of mind that they can work on that problem without a million tickets coming their way. The other aspect that's great is HCI and Nutanix provides a lot of flexibility and agility. That's quite similar to what you might experience with the cloud. Nutanix likes to call themselves a private cloud. Why they're agile is because, well, when we think about that crystal ball, right? Our IT teams need to plan and figure out what are we going to need to support over the next 5 years. That is a difficult task. I mean, it's next to impossible to know where technology is going to go in 5 years. So Nutanix makes life very easy in terms of scaling your resources as your application maybe demands increase. So An example of this is when maybe we start off in year 1 with a cluster of 3 nodes, but now our applications or our resource demands have increased substantially. Well, we can actually add a new node into our existing cluster, and the resources will be added to that global pool that's supporting those applications. Beyond just scaling out the infrastructure, we can actually scale up the infrastructure. So if those existing nodes maybe had extra drive bays, we can simply just add more disks to those nodes, maybe just tackling that storage and scaling that environment up. So that provides IT teams a lot of flexibility in terms of how they can go about tackling those business mandates that might come down the pipe, because it's very difficult to predict what those might be, especially over even a couple months down the line. Next slide, please.
Adam, there's a question from Romuald. Could you also give a brief description of VDI solutions that would work with Nutanix AHV as a replacement to VMware Horizon?
Yeah, yes, we can. I have a slide that will go over different validated solutions for a VDI specifically. So that'll be in probably the next 2. I just wanted to take a moment first to talk about AHV specifically. So I know today everyone is dealing with the elephant in the room, which is their VMware renewals, which are mentioned by Martin earlier, sometimes even 3x what is expected. Nutanix AHV is a great alternative to potentially using in place of ESXi. And what AHV is, it's Nutanix's virtualization platform that is built on Linux KVM, open source hypervisor, and is completely integrated with Nutanix stack. So you might be thinking, well, why KVM? KVM has been a proven technology and has been used across many different verticals at enormous scale. In fact, most of the public cloud providers actually run KVM under the hood many a time. What Nutanix has done is they've taken that KVM open source solution and has integrated with their own flavor, and it's essentially optimized it to run a hyper-converged solution. And then they've, over the years, added a ton of different enterprise features. So things like high availability, affinity policies, the ability to migrate workloads from one cluster to another, things that you might be doing today on VMware, you could continue doing so with AHV. As Gab mentioned today too, a lot of people are looking at solutions like Kubernetes or containers to support those workloads moving forward. Nutanix does support that capabilities as well, either with their own flavor of Kubernetes deployments or even the typical third-party ones that you might be used to today. On top of that, there's a lot of performance and optimization aspects with AHV. And an example of that with AI being such a prevalent topic today, Nutanix provides solution features like vGPU and GPU pass-through to give those applications that GPU they might need to run specific applications. This hypervisor can be managed and operated from that single pane of glass known as Prism. So Prism Element is a single cluster view, maybe like a vCenter, that you would use to administer your applications, perform those hypervisor tasks, as well as Nutanix offers a bird's eye view called Prism Central, which allows organizations to manage multiple different clusters that might be running AHV or even other hypervisors if the mixed environment is of benefit. This solution was built with security by design. So security is not an afterthought, it's a first thought. So when we think about things like the guest tools that are running in the VMs, we have Nutanix guest tools that's there to provide more security benefits. We think about secure boot, VTPM. These elements are all enabled within AHV today. Lastly, there's also lifecycle management. So when we think about all the different patches, upgrades that we need to perform within our environment, Nutanix makes it very simple to do that with a feature called Lifecycle Manager. What we can do with Lifecycle Manager is essentially we have a cluster of numerous servers. We can actually perform these updates during business hours because Nutanix is resilient. These upgrades are performed in a rolling fashion. So maybe the hardware vendor that we're using from that's supporting the Nutanix solution needs a firmware update. Well, we can use Lifecycle Manager to apply that update, take that node down, have the workloads run on the rest of the nodes. Once that update's been completed, we'll bring it back up, move the workloads back, and move on to the next node until the whole cluster has been updated. This really simplifies an IT team's ability to keep up to date with all of the potential security vulnerabilities that might come up or the patches that might come down the line. And one thing I'll talk about in the next slide is the AHV has been around for well over a decade now, so there's a ton of validated solutions. If you don't mind clicking on the next slide. So I know there's a question in the chat about VDI specifically. I'll chat about that, but you can see here on the screen that, you know, if you're trying to move away from potentially Horizon, Nutanix has even from the get-go been a vendor, a solution that supports numerous different VDI solutions. In fact, many of the solutions you may be leveraging today with VMware are likely to be validated to work with AHV. And Nutanix is, on a regular basis, validating more and more of these solutions as time goes by. So if you have a specific data protection vendor, maybe you're using Commvault as an example. We could continue leveraging that same data protection solution that we are used to, we know and love with AHV. If there's a networking and security appliance that we might be taking advantage of on VMware today, most likely that same solution can be deployed on AHV. And if there's any applications like big data, DevOps, containers, solutions like that that we need to make sure that we're supporting for our stakeholders, again, tons of reference architectures, tons of validated solutions with these applications running on AHV. And this goes beyond many different verticals, from government, healthcare, to finance, and just general business. Next slide, please. So when we think about moving from VMware to a different platform, one thing many of us are going to be grappling with is planning on making sure we have something that's feature parity to what we might have existing. So I like to put this slide up because it shows that whatever you might be using today on VMware, there's likely a solution or feature that we can take advantage of from Nutanix. An aspect I really love about Nutanix is their core product called Nutanix Cloud Infrastructure encompasses almost 90% of what you might see from most people's VMware environments. So if you're using ESXi today, we can use AHV from Nutanix. If we're using vSAN from VMware for their hyperconverged solution, well, Nutanix was a pioneer in HCI. If we need to replicate data from a primary data center to a secondary site, you might be using SRM to do that today, but you can use protection domains from Nutanix. And this is all bundled within their just common core suite. As Gab mentioned today too, it's very rare that a lot of people are planning on running everything on-prem or everything in the cloud. So Nutanix also provides you that hybrid cloud capabilities with something called Nutanix clusters, which is essentially a Nutanix environment that runs in your public cloud of choice, whether that's Azure or AWS. There's a ton of solutions in which Nutanix can perform or be feature parity to what you might be using with VMware today. So This is something that we'd love to chat about with different organizations about, and see if we can match up or make sure we can meet the requirements of your environment moving forward. Next slide, please. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about some of the value that we've seen with modernizing with Nutanix. So this was an IDC white paper. Number one was to highlight was a 43% reduced total cost of ownership. So if you can think about all those management interfaces that we're consolidating into one pane of glass, I mean, that definitely simplifies things for your IT teams and gives you that kind of a one single place to collaborate with each other. Because Nutanix was built with resiliency and high availability in mind, many organizations see 97% less unplanned downtime, especially during those upgrade cycles that might come up. And with that being said as well, IT teams become more efficient. Instead of having all of these specialized skills and in different places to live and breathe on your day-to-day, to coordinate together in order to support that application, you have that one interface to potentially manage almost all of your environment with to perform those types of tasks. And Nutanix was also built with a ton of data protection capability. So again, we can easily set up plans and policies to replicate workloads from one site to another physical site, or even integrate with the public cloud to send data over to your public cloud of choice. From an IT agility perspective, because we're taking away that crystal ball that many of us are used to in terms of planning our infrastructure, now we're able to meet those business mandates as they're brought to us. Maybe there's a new one that just came out of the blue. It's easy to expand our existing environment to whatever resources we need to support those new initiatives from our organization. Next slide, please. So I want to take some time just to talk about how do we even go about making the change in the first place. Next slide. So regardless of the platform that we might be looking at, I like to put this up as a adequate migration framework. So our first step in our journey to moving away from VMware or evaluating an alternative is to do an assessment or discovery on our environment. So what workloads are currently running? What types of virtual appliances or solutions is that environment currently supporting? What are our business objectives? And how can we develop a migration strategy? One thing that, as an example at least, there's 950 validated solutions out there for AHV, and that's continuing to grow. But we need to ensure that whatever might be running on your environment is also going to be supported on AHV. As mentioned earlier by Martin, some solutions are only supported or were built with VMware in mind. And with that, we need to make sure there's a strategy to address that if they were to move onto a different solution. Once that discovery, the assessment, and the understanding of our current environment has been done, we know the requirements that are needed to run those workloads, we can start to plan how to go about migrating into a new platform. So for instance, if maybe we want to start to group VMs together, set up migration waves. Maybe we're going to migrate the HR department before the marketing department. Maybe there's some tasks we need to perform before our migration efforts even occur. An example might be maybe we want to look into upgrading our application to a supported version before it goes onto AHV. All of these elements need to be planned out and are just usually uncovered by that assessment aspect. And the idea with the planning is to come up with a strategy in order to migrate your existing workloads to Nutanix or a different hypervisor or platform, essentially coming up with that migration strategy or plan. Once that plan's been developed, we go through the execution. So deploying a migration tools, Nutanix offers a migration tool that's quite nifty called Nutanix Move, which essentially replicates data from a source to a target. And once the data has been replicated in full, we could do a non-intrusive cutover, thus turning off the VM on the source site and powering it on the target site. Once it's powered on, we will need to work with maybe subject matter experts, the application specialists to validate that all the requirements, the prerequisites that we assessed or set out in our assessment phase have been met. And if they have, we'll give that a checkbox and move on to the next workloads. As Gab mentioned as well, this is a new platform, so we also need to be aware that we need to understand what knowledge is required to manage it in day one or day two operations. I like to think Nutanix is quite intuitive to use, especially coming from VMware. The features like migrate are very much like vMotion, and the terminology is very similar. Something that we can all work together on is we have a ton of expertise here at ITI, and we are always more than happy to discuss how Nutanix could be a right solution for you and your organization, as well as even give you demos or the opportunity to kick the can with some potential Nutanix solutions. Next slide, please. Okay, next. So just wanted to cover high level. Again, we talked a little bit about this on the migration framework, but some aspects where ITI specifically can help is with phase one, which is that assessment piece. So what we can provide organizations is sort of a risk assessment. So or a validation that whatever you're running on your ESXi environment can be run on AHV. And if there's any risks, we can identify those and help you come up with that migration strategy and that strategic approach to adopt a new hypervisor. Next slide, please. Some of the elements that we look at are the types of virtual appliances that you might be running. So if you're using a specific security vendor appliance, or if you're using a specific VDI solution, we want to make sure that there's a path forward to adopt that same solution on Nutanix AHV. As well, if there's databases, things like that are usually quite critical to organizations. So coming up with potentially a tailored migration approach to minimize any impact during that migration is crucial. And lastly, the run-of-the-mill general workloads, how are we going to group these together? Are we going to create waves for migration aspects and working with subject matter experts from your team to validate that everything is A-OK moving forward? Next slide. Once the assessment or plan has been developed, ITI can provide the actual conversion service. So I just wanted to give you guys maybe an example of and a customer that might be running Nutanix today, but on ESXi. What we can do is deploy a swing gear, or if you're going through a migration cycle, a refresh cycle, you might have purchased new HCI nodes. Next slide, please. What we can do is we can actually stand up those HCI nodes. Click next again a couple times. Yeah. Perfect. We can actually stand up a AHV environment in tandem with what you might be running today, which is likely ESXi. From there, we can start to migrate those workloads from your ESXi environment to AHV as per the assessment or discovery that we did on phase one. Now, as those workloads get migrated, we start to free up the resources within your environment, and then we can take offline your existing ESXi nodes and then turn them into AHV. Once that's done, we can continue moving the rest of the workloads over, and then we can go ahead and decommission your existing ESXi nodes. And if we want to continue to use them, we can go ahead and add those into the AHV cluster. Next, please. So once that's been added into the AHV cluster, from there, we can go ahead and evict the swing gear if required. Next slide, please. So I want to just thank everyone for hearing about AHV alternatives. One thing I'll just mention is we will be hosting a very in-depth AHV boot camp in April in Ottawa. So we'll be sending some information forward about that, but we'll go over demos on AHV compared to ESXi and provide a more in-depth assessment and migration approach to moving from ESXi to AHV. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Martin.
All right, thank you, Adam. Thanks for your insight and expertise. Folks, we now will be available to answer any questions you might have. I know there's been some conversations going on while we were presenting in the chat. Gabrielle, Adam, myself are going to remain on the platform on Teams. You're here to answer any questions you might have. Feel free to write them down. I know that your microphones have been muted, so it's impossible for you to actually speak, but you can write them down in the chat and we'll answer them as they come in. Again, thank you very much for taking the time and attending this webinar. We hope to be working with you in the near future to help you out, migrating on over an alternative that will suit your needs and most importantly, free up some of that budget so you can keep on innovating with your IT experts moving forward.